All right. Hello and welcome to UC Unbowed's virtual town hall. My name is Gwen. I'm a California native. I'm a longtime friend of the University of California, and I'm also one of the founders of UC Unbowed. I want to start by acknowledging the moment. Authoritarian breakthrough is frightening and exhausting, and this has been an especially difficult week. So I'd like to ask us to take a moment of silence for the memory of Renee Nicole Good and for everyone else who's been harmed by ICE. Thank you. So, as difficult as this moment is, we have reason to be hopeful as the resistance grows larger and broader and more organized every day. I want to thank you all for being here tonight, for your solidarity as we work together on behalf of our freedom and our democracy. In this town hall, we will discuss threats to UC, but we're going to focus on ways that folks are fighting back and how you can help defend our public university. So just a little bit of housekeeping. This is a large group, so participants are going to be muted throughout this meeting, but we encourage you to use emojis or the chat to share your responses and your enthusiasm, and we can practice right now by if you haven't yet, saying what your name and your affiliation is by dropping that into the chat, by using the react button to show your enthusiasm for being here in support of the University of California. Second point is that there will be a Q&A period after the speakers. Because everybody's going to be muted throughout this meeting, we ask you to write your questions in the chat anytime during the meeting, but please mark them as a question. Literally write the word question before your question so that they'll be easy for us to identify and for the speakers to respond to. One last point is that we have a chat captain today who will be dropping links into the chat and comments at certain points, and those will always be marked with a little megaphone symbol so that you'll be able to find them easily. And the last point is that yes, this meeting is being recorded, so you can watch it again and again after today. At this point, I want to introduce our first speaker, who is Dr. NUPUR Agrawal. Dr. Agrawal is an assistant professor of internal medicine and pediatrics at UCLA, where she advocates for improving delivery of healthcare to patients and communities. She's also a member of the UCLA Gender Health Program and provides primary and gender health-related care to transgender and gender diverse patients. Let's give it up for NUPUR Agrawal. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Gwen, and thank you all for having me and for being here tonight. So, the thing that I wanted to talk about today was the importance of protecting healthcare, especially kind of given the changing sociopolitical climate and all the threats that we've had to our larger academic institutions and healthcare as a result. I just want to say the views are my own, and I also put my email down there. So if anyone would like to reach out afterwards, definitely would love to get in touch. So just to kind of start off and really understand, what is at stake when we talk about all of the potential threats that are coming our way. So I'm an academic physician, and, to the left of this screen, what you see is there's a lot that goes into academic medicine and to making the UC medical centers work, right? So physicians, clinicians, we're providing direct clinical care. We're training the next generation that is going to care for our population. We do advocacy, both patient-facing and community-facing. We're doing cutting-edge research to try to mitigate, prevent, treat diseases that we see. We're trying to be innovative and integrate any sort of technology that we can to really make more efficient and effective the care that we provide. And a lot of that comes with administrative burden as well. And a lot of what we do is dictated by what the state and the federal government says we can and can't do. But to kind of understand the impact of UC and UC Health, combining all of the campuses across the state, is the largest academic health system in America. right? And it's the largest health sciences instructional program. Every year we have over 15,000 students and trainees across all of the campuses who come to become healthcare professionals. It's the second largest healthcare delivery system in California after Kaiser. We employ 200,000 Californians. And depending on the numbers that you look at, we care for anywhere from 2 to 2.5 million unique people every single year who represent 99% of zip codes throughout the state, right? So the reach is extremely far. So what ends up being at stake is incredibly important. And even economically, right, there's the healthcare aspect, but there's the financial aspect because everyone wants to know, well, where does the money go, right? So for every dollar that the UC health system receives, it puts out $21 in economic output, right? And every year we get about $12 billion in revenue that we pay for federal, state, local taxes. So we stimulate the economy that way. And in 2019, we got $6 billion in research money. So the work that we're doing has been proven over and over again to be extremely worthwhile and to be extremely important to fund. But it's important to recognize that healthcare is what we call a wicked problem. It's a really complex problem to which there really is no solution. And when you look at all of the different components that go on, right, when we care for people in our clinical settings, right, we have physician shortages, provider burnout, we have an aging population, rising costs. Our public health infrastructure is abysmal in this country, if I can say that. And there are all of these different stakeholders and all of these different challenges that we face. And what happened last year as a result is when the federal government interferes in a way that's not productive, what we're doing is we're further stressing an already incredibly strained system. If you speak with anybody who works in healthcare today, they can tell you the long hours, the care for increasingly complex patients, all of the challenges that come into play. And then basically we spent an entire year instead of caring for patients, doing research, educating the next generation, trying to address all of these threats from the federal government. So one of the first threats that we experienced last year with the change of the administration was the ban on words. This was something that we saw in the first administration as well. And the ban on words, so the New York Times released an article with 200 words that were banned. And some of the words I've highlighted here are incredibly important, and we really cannot do healthcare or research without these words, right? How am I going to represent half of the population if I can't use the word gender or women, right? How are we going to address the care for vulnerable populations if I can't say disability or minority or immigrants, right? How can we provide care if I can't talk about breastfeeding, which we know is one of the ways that we can create and support a healthier next generation, right? So some of the words are just absolutely, there's no way to do the work that we do without them. And this is a QR code and a screenshot of a piece that I had the privilege of writing with one of my colleagues, Keith Norris, who is an incredible advocate and does a lot of our work in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we really break apart the history of federal government interference in the words that we use and really how this makes it extremely difficult for us to communicate effectively in the healthcare space. Then the next thing, which Claudia and Anna are going to talk about in much greater detail, so I won't go over that as much, but really then there's been this constant barrage of targeting academic institutions, our freedom of speech, freedom of thought, freedom to think of questions that are extremely important to the health of Americans and answer those questions through our research. And we spent so much of last year scrubbing our website, scrubbing our work, being like, we can't write anything that's going to upset the federal government. And what ultimately happened was, at least at UCLA, over $500 million of funds were frozen, and the work of the people who are going to speak after me has been absolutely incredible in restoring that funding. But the landscape within the institutions has changed entirely. There was an article that Tatiana Schlossberg wrote, which many of you may have seen, But if you haven't read it, I highly encourage you to read it. She struggled with leukemia after giving birth to her second child, and she is the cousin of RFK Jr. And she talks about very clearly what is at stake when federal funding dollars are at risk and research is at risk. Now, over the last month and two, what we've seen is this discussion on vaccines and trying to pare down vaccines for our children. And as a result, over the last couple of years, we've seen this resurgence of vaccine preventable illnesses. And especially in California, we have a growing population of folks who believe that vaccination is dangerous, but perhaps don't recognize the dangers of the illnesses that those vaccines were designed to treat, right? And so this to the left is the revised schedule for vaccines that has been proposed. And we can see that many vaccines that are targeted are at risk. And meningitis is a killer disease. You contract meningitis and people can die within hours. And the people who are most affected are adolescents and college children. So given that we represent the UCs, it's incredibly important for the safety of our children to think about that. And this is a photo of smallpox, which was actually eliminated because of vaccines, and we know that vaccines save lives. We're going to talk later about a call to action, but what I wanted to bring up and share with you is that gender affirming care across the country is at risk, and the federal government is imposing limitations on clinical care. They have basically said that any hospital that accepts Medicare and Medicaid will be basically devoid of their funding if they provide gender affirming care to minors, which we know is life-saving treatment for the kids who need it. And so you can use this QR code. I can put the links in the chat, but right now is a period of public comment. Anyone can comment. And the greatest advocacy that we can do is actually write and put down publicly why we know that this is going to kill children and why it's important for us to protect parents' rights to decide the best care for their kids with their children's doctors and not because of the federal government. And this is the second, so they've split it up into two different pieces and proposed rules to try to say, okay, maybe one can go through if not the other. So it's really important to comment on both of those. And you can do so anonymously. You will get a tracking number that will help you track even if you do submit anonymously. And I leave you with this quote from the father of modern pathology, but really the role of clinicians and really all healthcare professionals and professionals in general is to support those who are vulnerable, and this is our chance to do so.
Thank you so much, Nupur. It's really such an important perspective that you bring. Really appreciate your expertise and your perspective and sharing your experience this year. Let's make sure that we show some love. There's a lot of love happening already. Thank you, Nupur. Our next speaker tonight is Professor Claudia Polsky. She's a clinical professor of law at UC Berkeley and the founding director of CAL's Environmental Law Clinic. She has litigated cases in trial and appellate courts, including the U.S. Supreme Court. She has testified before Congress and the California legislature, and she's drafted and successfully defended many environmental regulations. Welcome, Claudia. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. And I just want to thank everybody who is showing up at this late hour. Fascism is exhausting. And it's hard to believe we're not even 1 year in, but the way we defeat it is by continuing to stay awake and stay alert. So thank you all for being here. I'm going to share my screen now. So I want to talk to you about what I believe is an absolutely necessary fight for money and power, and this is the fight to restore unlawfully terminated research funding to UC. This is a fight that I, of course, wish the university had taken up immediately on its own behalf, but that is a story for another time. And so this is really a tale of how faculty ultimately self-organized to address unlawful grant terminations that began in February, shortly after the inauguration, with the issuance of executive orders that are by now familiar to you all on climate, on energy, on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, on gender and so forth. And those were operationalized in significant part by the Department of Government Efficiency, Elon Musk's DOGE, which instructed agencies to begin terminating grants that implicated all of these issues and implicated the forbidden words that NUPUR described. I first became aware of this rash of arbitrary and abrupt grant terminations in February and March. That's when they started to happen, and they began to affect agencies and researchers in the core areas that I work on. EPA and NSF were among the early agencies to terminate scores of grants. And just to concretize this, UC grants in these areas include things as diverse as an EPA grant to control methane emissions from landfills using a cutting edge combination of satellite imagery and drones, and the development of K through 12 science curriculum at the Lawrence Hall of Science at UC Berkeley. For locals like me and our children, this is a wonderful local science museum, but it actually has national reach in developing curricula used throughout America. And so this was quite alarming to me that these things were being defunded. Also in the humanities, we had Dr. Robert Hurst, who began his career studying Mark Twain's works at 28. That's this lower left photo, and continued working on Mark Twain's unpublished works until he retired recently in his 80s. That's the photo on the right. He had the longest running succession of NEH grants in the agency's history. That did not matter to the agency. His grant was terminated. And so where was UC leadership? Again, a question for another time. It was necessary, I thought, for faculty to fill the void as more and more of these terminations happened and had cumulatively extraordinary financial impact, given that the UC system receives about $4 billion in federal research funding annually. And so to me, the available mechanism was for faculty to collectively file a class action, something that would require a handful of faculty members that you see here to bravely lend their name to the action and tell their personal stories, but something that, if successful, would extend relief to all affected UC faculty. Not every person would have to be joined in a lawsuit, which is, of course, completely impracticable across 10 campuses with thousands of researchers. And so much of the last year has been the privilege and the work of taking long sworn statements from individual researchers who've had funding terminated so that we could make the case to the court that these grants were unlawfully terminated, and also tell compelling human stories about why this research matters, not just to the researchers and their careers, but to society at large. Over time, we have come to collaborate with a large number of entities, including CUCFA, the Council of Faculty Associations, unions, other litigators, most recently the City of St. Paul fighting Department of Energy terminations. And so as more get into the fight, we have been coordinating our efforts. Grant terminations continue to pace across many, many agencies. NIH, with calamitous effects, terminated dozens and dozens of grants to UCLA in one big suspension exercise, grants on Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, cancer. UC Davis was hard hit. Its transportation research hub was shut down through the cancellation of a single grant that actually affected 78 researchers. Susan Handy, who wrote this wonderful book on alternative transportation, was the lead on that grant. UC San Diego receives funding for its Scripps Institute of Oceanography through the Department of Defense, in addition to the National Science Foundation. And this is an example of the real consequences of terminating grant funding. This is a ship that's in dry dock in Singapore, where the satellite apparatus that you see circled in red, which is enormous and very heavy, is at risk of crashing to the deck and potentially not only destroying portions of the ship and the instrumentation on it, but killing a couple dozen scientific crew members, because the DoD is millions of dollars in arrears paying for the upkeep of this ship, which it was supposed to do pursuant to a grant. And then most recently, the Department of Energy terminated grants only to blue states, including a grant for something called ARCHES, which was going to generate hydrogen for vehicles and ships and all sorts of hard to decarbonize sectors using only renewable energy. And this would be absolutely planetarily transformative. And this is the single largest grant that we are in the process of litigating. It's over $1 billion and involves UC Irvine, Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, and additional UCs. System-wide, hundreds of grants related to DEIB research across multiple agencies were unlawfully terminated. The converse is you would be incredibly proud of UC if you saw the list of things that our institution is doing in this arena. So we went to court with 3 legal claims. Briefly, they were a violation of the Administrative Procedure Act, which prohibits agencies from doing arbitrary and capricious things like terminating a $1 billion grant with a 2-paragraph form letter, violations of the US Constitution by prohibiting words like equity and diversity and inclusion and women and transgender because that's a First Amendment violation. And we have also alleged that there's an equal protection violation under the Fifth Amendment because blue states and red states are being treated differently. And finally, in some cases, there are actually violations of specific statutes through which Congress has commanded agencies to fund certain things. And the Arches Hub would be an example of that. The results so far have been encouraging. We have gotten 3 court injunctions that have successively restored all of 6 agencies' terminated grants across the 10-campus system. We got an additional injunction reinstating the suspensions at UCLA. That was more than 500 grants and $500 million. And right now we are continuing to litigate the issue of Department of Energy terminations. These things took an enormous number of resources. I was incredibly grateful to 2 law firms that stepped up to litigate this with me pro bono, in addition to our dean and, of course, our courageous plaintiffs. And I have 3 times, and then this photo of some attorneys, because we actually have an attorney team of 14 now, representing an equal number of plaintiffs. And we have a website that shows our concurrent litigation filings in the district court and the Ninth Circuit. We're simultaneously in trial court and on appeal because it's a very procedurally complex case. And you'll see from the literally hundreds of filings how much collective effort this has taken. On the other hand, because we now do have a roadmap, it's potentially much easier for others to follow. And the reason we've hyperlinked all these documents is to make it possible for other researchers to replicate this should they so choose. It's really interesting. I've learned that academics are a very risk-averse group. And whenever I've talked to people about joining this suit or about the litigation, the first thing people talk about is, what if you lose? What happens next? You went on trial. What happens on appeal? What happens if it goes to the Supreme Court? What happens if the government comes back for the money? What happens if they come for our children? And they're just there's incredible creativity in spinning out nightmare scenarios. But for all that these reinstatements are precarious, things are being appealed through the system right now. What is the alternative? First of all, I want to say that many of the grants are safe for various reasons. Grants implicating diversity, equity, and inclusion are ironically some of the safest because the First Amendment claims are very strong here, even though those are the ones the Trump administration would most like to kill. And then the UCLA reinstatements are safe thanks to the litigation you'll hear about from the unions in a moment. There's also, of course, the time value of having $1 billion, which is a lot better than not having $1 billion. And there's a huge amount of spending that's been going on and research that's been occurring because we have these injunctions in place and have for a number of months. The alternative is, of course, just declaring defeat. So it puzzles me when people focus on the precarity of what we've won, because if we hadn't litigated, we would have 0 of our research dollars. And then there are, of course, the moral stakes. If the UC is literally, not hyperbolically, the #1 public research institution in the world, and we are not willing to go to bat to fight for our research, what are we doing here? And so this is a subject for another time. It's a rich topic, but I've been really at a meta level distressed that the UC at a leadership level doesn't seem to have a theory of power. It seems to be just doing a lot of reactive things. And so this is my reading recommendation. And the short takeaway is you actually have to confront power with power. Individuals can be very moral. I'm sure there are many moral individuals in these Trump agencies, many people from prior administrations. But the way that the UC is trying to negotiate with them suggests that these institutions as a whole will behave morally, and I don't think that history supports that optimism. So fortunately, UC Unbowed and Indivisible and unions and all of you do seem to have a theory of power, and it's that if all little fish get together and make themselves into an elegant formation, they can actually chase away the big fish. And so, what to do? For grantees, we've been saying just work fast, spend down, work fast, spend down. We don't think they're going to come back for the money. And for everyone else, just keep showing up. That's how we win. And ideally, every time you show up, bring 3 friends. And so there is no certainty here. As Mr. Johnson said, life itself is uncertain, so grant funding is no different. But the one thing that is certain, to invoke another line from Mr. Johnson, is that if we don't hang together, we shall all hang separately. So it's really warming to see nearly 200 of you here. I know that others will be able to access this via recording. And thank you so much for the privilege of sharing this work with you.
Thank you so much, Claudia. It's really exciting to see the roadmap, I think, especially paving a pathway that can be replicated. Thank you so much for your words. And you're seeing some appreciation there in the emojis and in the chat. So thank you so much. Our third speaker tonight is Professor Anna Markowitz, who is an assistant professor in the Human Development and Psychology Division in the School of Education and Information Studies at UCLA. Anna serves as president of the UCLA Faculty Association, which represents campus faculty on employment and academic freedom issues and advocates for a vibrant and well-funded system of public higher education in California. Let's welcome Anna.
Hi, hi all. Thanks for having me, and but no, thank you for putting me after NUPUR and Claudia, who are both excellent speakers and a tough act to follow. I am going to talk a little bit more specifically about the sort of final lawsuit, the UC unions versus Donald Trump. So the July 31st freezing of $600 million of grants at UCLA specifically that Claudia mentioned followed a federal playbook that at this point we had seen a few times. We had seen that they were trying to leverage grant dollars that were used to keep our institutions up and running, to serve our students, to do life-saving research, in order to force institutions to change policies that are in line with their ideologies. So from the get-go, the faculty have really been thinking about this with a plan in mind. We knew that the first thing we had to do was get the funds back to maintain a position of strength. Of course, we had seen some victories in this thanks to Claudia prior to the suspension that we saw in July. We also knew that we needed to file a lawsuit to immediately assert that what the federal government was doing was in fact illegal, and that this sort of strong arm tactic violated our First and 10th Amendment rights. And then the third thing that we needed to do was find an alternative source of funding, and to really think about, when we think about that source of funding, what the breadth of the UC mission was and how to reassert the UC as a public good. We, as an institution, perhaps have struggled to put forward our value to the community, and perhaps as a country, we've struggled to assert the value of public goods generally, and that's something we wanted to change. So we've mostly heard from Claudia about how she has done absolutely everything to get the funds back to maintain our position of strength, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about the lawsuit that asserted that this was a strong arm and extortive tactic that was illegal. So along with the suspension of funds, you may know there was a 29-page letter of demands and a $1.2 billion ransom from the UC. The document was not initially made public. This is actually something that the faculty associations had to sue to be made public. It was our belief that this was absolutely a matter of public importance. Someone in the chat said, "Hey, I'm not a UC alumni, but I pay for the place because I'm a taxpayer." Yeah, that's our position too. And when we started fighting for the letter, we said, sure, it's particularly valuable to us as faculty because this is our workplace, but it's the right of every Californian to see this. We're just well positioned to make the argument. Once we did have that document, we immediately, got it out there as wide as possible, and we observed this staggering breadth of what it was doing, trying to give control of key institutional decisions right over to the federal government. Everything from our curriculum to our research to the way we do practitioner care, as NUPUR was talking about, admissions, hiring. It's who gets to be in the room, and it's what gets said in the room. And many of the things that they were asking for were, in fact, illegal per state and federal law. We felt it was incredibly important for us to set the precedent and hold the line because we are the UC and because we are a massive employer and a provider of healthcare, as you've already heard. Who decided to fight? The labor unions and the faculty associations decided to fight. In many ways, which is really exciting, it's a suit that is the first of its kind because it represents a wall-to-wall coalition of all the UC unions, all the UC faculty associations, and the American Association of University Professors. We followed a template that AAUP had done with the Harvard case, but in our case, we thought it was really important to have all of our voices come together and not just speak as professors about this, but to speak to the breadth of what the UC does as a public institution. We're not just trying to save our jobs, we're trying to save what the UC is to this state. As folks have noted in the chat, and believe me, it's something I spend a lot of time thinking about at night, the UC has chosen not to join the suit. This differs from Harvard. At Harvard, while the AAUP was the original filer of the suit, Harvard joined the suit. The UC has not. To answer the question that many of you have as to why, I wish I had a good answer. Our current thinking is basically that ultimately the extortive pressure of the federal government is working. They are afraid of losing funding. What we often hear from our administrators when they will talk to us is that we don't understand just how much money is at stake. We understand that the UC gets $17 billion a year in federal funding. We just simply don't believe that that tap is going to turn back on. I'll talk a little bit at the end about how the federal government seems to be changing tactics as it is because we are winning these First Amendment cases, as CLAUDIA clearly demonstrated. But they are sort of appealing to a past that doesn't exist. And instead, I think what some of us are thinking about is like, look, what decisions did we make? What power did we cede when we decided that our state, we were going to give up state dollars for federal dollars? These are all public dollars, right? California is a donor state. We on average give $3,000 more per taxpayer than we get back from the federal government. The $17 billion is not some gift, it's our money. But we, by getting that money roped through the federal government, did give up some control. So this is a major thing. So as I have said, the argument of AAUP versus Trump essentially makes an argument that they're using coercive tactics to shape UC policy, and they're not following the procedures that are outlined. In doing so, they are attempting to curb our First Amendment rights, and they're violating the 10th Amendment right by not treating states equally and by trying to take a power from the state that is allotted to the state within our constitutional structure. The preliminary injunction was granted by Judge Riedel in November, and what this means is essentially that the Trump administration can't use this strategy in the future and cannot use it until the final argument is settled. This is great news for us because it has done a lot for our students, for our researchers. It gives us another year of admissions without having this hanging over our heads, which is huge. And I think something we don't talk about enough is it helps us admit the students who deserve to be here, not who the federal government thinks should be here, for at least another year. But it's not the end of the story. And I think what's huge is that the end of the story is what's next. We have fought back successfully against this particular extortive moment, but the federal government is changing tactics. They're thinking about what they can do to programs like the Pell program to try to affect who receives it and to try to coerce schools by saying, look, if you want to receive Pell funding, you have to do X, Y, or Z. So RI, the UC continues to feel that extortionary pressure and is making changes based on presumptive budget shortfalls, and they're doing it in ways that may align with the federal government's whims in order to save themselves from future problems. And so the question that we're really asking ourselves is, what is the UC that we want to save? What are the public institutions that we're fighting for? How could that be funded and managed? And how does our effort to resist at the UC connect to broader movements against authoritarianism and fascism? And that's why we're excited to talk to groups like Indivisible, because this is the UC, but this is a fight that's bigger. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Anna. It's a pretty bracing story that you're telling us, and we're glad to be in the fight with you. Thanks so much. I want to remind folks that if you have questions for Anna or NUPUR or Claudia or anyone else that you hear speak today, please feel free to write those in the chat. We'll have a few minutes for Q&A in a few minutes. But first, I'd like to introduce Donna Graves, who's a UCLA and UC Santa Cruz alum and one of the founding members of UC Unbowed. Here's Donna.
Hey, everybody. Why don't we put some love in the reactions for these incredible speakers who I really want to thank before I get into my remarks. All of you and all of the faculty and staff and students who've been on the front lines of this fight really inspire us. It's your standing up and pushing back and refusing to be intimidated that's given us the courage and the inspiration to move forward. As UC Unbowed, which is this town hall is part of. It's a new campaign that came together because we saw how hard people like all of you were working to protect the University of California, and we knew you couldn't do it alone. Our chapter of Indivisible East Bay, recognized that there was tremendous untapped power in the tens of thousands of alumni and community members, not just in California, but across the nation, who really cherish this institution and who don't want to see it attacked or extorted or dismantled by the current administration. So sorry, I'm trying to make this slide move forward. It's why we created this group. And we launched with a petition in the middle of just this past November, not even 2 months ago, with help from friends that Stand for Campus Freedom. The petition has really a clear demand that UC leadership resist political threats and interference from the Trump administration. We expect them to stand firm, and when they do, we are going to have their backs. People responded to our message. Within just a few weeks, we had more than 5,000 signatures from alumni and allies who were stepping up to join the fight. We delivered the petition at the UC Regents meeting in November at UCLA, and just last month to Governor Newsom. We've seen that whether or not people have an attachment to the UC, whether they've even set foot on a campus, they understand what's at stake here. We believe that the Trump administration's attacks on the UCs, one of California's most valuable public goods, as Anna just indicated, is really an attack on all of us. The UC isn't just any university. It is the #1 public university system in the world and the largest public research university system anywhere. It embodies our highest ideals of excellence, access, public service, and academic freedom. And because it's a public university and it has enormous impact, what happens here sends a signal everywhere. If UC bends to the regime's will, it won't just be a loss for California. It will be a crushing blow to higher education everywhere. So UC Unbowed was launched by Indivisible East Bay to bring, as I said, alumni and supporters into this struggle. We're just getting started. In addition to the petition and webinars like this. We've been showing up in the East Bay at community events and at Cal football games, including the big game with Stanford. And some of our members have been showing off their street theater chops. We're hoping that these efforts are going to catalyze a truly statewide effort by working with Indivisible California to bring in more chapters and by inviting other groups to join in, as several have who've been co-sponsored this town hall. This is how we defend the institutions we care about, not quietly or individually, but loudly, together with courage and collective power. So tonight, we're asking you to take the next steps. Please sign the petition if you haven't already. Carlos will drop the link in the chat. And you can join our mailing list. We promise not to spam you. It will be very occasional that you get notices from us, but we'd like to be building this coalition. So share the campaign and stay engaged. Thank you so much. And now I'm going to invite Inette Dishler, a member of our team, to facilitate the Q&A session. Inette is really a valued member of UC Unbowed and a retiree with over 20 years experience at UC Berkeley. Thanks, Inette.
Thank you, Donna. And good evening, everyone. What an amazing night this has been already. All of our speakers are so fantastic. And we've had a lot of energy in the chat in response to comments that all of you made, reactions, as well as questions. So I would say the questions fall into two main themes. So I'm going to do some grouping because we don't have a lot of time to get to them. But the first one is for Dr. Agrawal. And there's a lot of interest in what you were talking about in the ban on words. And how does this actually play out in medical care across California when you can't say words like woman or talk about breastfeeding specifically or things like that? What is that actually amounting to in the care that patients across California are able to get or not get?
So that's a great question. So I know there was a comment about the breastfeeding, and I figured we would talk about it. So the way that the federal government justified these words that are on this list was they said that they selected these words to uphold the executive orders around banning trans care and banning abortions and kind of all of these bans that were going on in place, right? So that was their justification for doing it. So breastfeeding ended up on this list because I think what they want is not to talk about chest feeding or trans people nursing their children. And really what, the fact that I'm even having to explain this and this nuance, right, highlights how ridiculous this is, right? People can call it whatever, right? I breastfed 2 babies and I can call it nursing or chest feeding or breastfeeding. It doesn't matter because it's a really human part of what we do. And the federal government shouldn't dictate what we can and cannot say when we're thinking about questions and answering questions and doing research. And so this ban on words is actually extremely important because there was never a formal ban, right? But once the New York Times published this list of 200 words, that list circulated all across every academic institution in this country. And basically, departments were having closed-door meetings saying, hey, these are the words that we cannot use if we want to keep up our funding. And so as it trickled down, it was basically like, don't use these words or we're not going to get funding, right? And so what happened was that the fear won, and this is, I think, a theme of what we're all talking about, is that with any sort of authoritarian regime, which we talk about in that paper that I linked to, is there is fear mongering and there's thought control. And that is exactly what this is, right? And the effect is still very real. So even though we've restored all of our funding, how we go about our day-to-day business in terms of research applications and research questions and writing and communication with patients is very different, right? It's the words are starting to creep up again, but it is very difficult. And our trainees especially ask this question all the time is, I'm interested in research. what should I change about words I'm using so that I can actually get funding to do the work, right? And so we have spent countless hours across the country wasting time scrubbing websites, changing words, thinking about it. I myself have spent days thinking about, okay, well, how do I say advocacy in a different way? There's not a good way, right? There's a reason we use the words that we use, and we've decided as a collective community that these words are important. And so the effect is extremely real. But the underlying theme of a lot of this is they have some pet issues, and trans care is one of them. So I know a lot of folks are asking, and I'm just adding a question here that folks have asked, what can we do? So I'm going to put in the chat real quick something I've put together. So if you want to do something, basically federal funding continues to be at risk because now they're saying, oh, well, if we provide gender affirming care to anyone under the age of 18 and you get Medicare or Medicaid dollars, which is essentially every single hospital in the entire country, then you're not going to get any federal funding. Most of the budget for every single hospital comes from federal funding, right? And so we cannot function without the federal dollars. And so what we need to do is inundate them with public comment after public comment after public comment in the next month so that they're just wrapped up in their paperwork because they legally have to respond to the public comments. And that is the way that we can fight back and say, no, we are going to keep gender affirming care. The one caveat which I wrote is you can comment as many times as you want. And I gave you an example. Just do it slightly different every time, because if the posts are exactly the same or cut paste or part of a campaign, the government holds the right to not post, right? So you kind of have to track and make sure your comments are getting posted so the work you're doing is actually making a difference. So even if you do it anonymously, like I said, you get a tracking code. But tell everybody, even within yesterday, since I did it last night, like 300 more people have done it. I've told every student to do it that I saw today. Like, tell everyone. And this is a great way to get the public together. And this is also not California specific. This is at the national level. So kids can't go anywhere to get care if this goes through. And so in California, tying it to the UCs, and sorry, I don't mean to take up all the time, but tying it to the UCs, California is a safe haven state for gender affirming care and for abortion care. So I have seen myself in clinic, parents bring their children from Texas where their pediatrician was providing the care and the hormones before. They now schedule a flight, book a hotel in California, take the kid out of school and come for an hour meeting so I can write the prescription instead of someone who's like down the street from them, right? This is absolutely ridiculous in so many levels. And so it's really important that we speak up in this way.
Thank you so much, Dr. Agrawal. I want to acknowledge and honor how much energy there has been from the participants on this webinar around questioning the role and action or lack of action from UC leadership. For Claudia and Anna, I know that you do not represent UC leadership, so it's putting you in an awkward position to try and justify what they're doing. But any insights you can offer as to why they have not filed suit on their own or joined the suits that you have brought forward that explains any of the position that they've taken here. I think people would really appreciate any insights you can offer, recognizing that you'd have to do this in a very short amount of time. But I'll toss it to both Claudia and Anna for whichever one of you wants to take that.
Claudia, would you like to start?
Sure, I'll start because I began asking UC leadership very repeatedly and vocally as early as February what they plan to do about these grant terminations. And I went to every single committee meeting, town hall, other setting I could, including hauling out to UC Regents meeting in Mission Bay to raise this issue, to invite UC to collaborate. I was really hoping to just amass these files and then hand over my accordion folders to UC Council so they could take up the charge. And they kept demurring. And all I have to say is that fear and lack of strategy seem to be sort of competing for the dominant theme. But there was also, I think, just terrible psychology because when the fascist, spans two DSM categories by being a malignant narcissist, you should very quickly realize that he is not simply an attention grabber and a self-promoter, but that he actually takes pleasure in being sadistic. That is one of the key diagnostic criteria. And so to think that if you capitulate, you'll be spared is just fundamentally psychologically misguided. And institutions like Brown and others that early capitulated only to find that then they were on a short list of institutions from whom more flesh was being extracted, learned that lesson the hard way. And so I don't know what it's going to take, political science, history, psychology courses for the leadership. I mean, I don't mean to be flippant, but it's been stupefying. They've had every opportunity, every invitation to be partners, to take it over. There's no ego involved. We'd love to hand it over, and they just do not show up.
I think I will just to add to that, I'll say a little bit of what I said before. I don't think that they had a plan. I think they thought that they could avoid this by putting their heads down and not being offensive. They settled various lawsuits because they believed that they could not be attacked on the basis of some of the claims that we saw in the letter, which of course, to Claudia's point, is completely spurious. The goal here is not to restore civil rights for Jewish students, Black students, students of color, anyone. It's to find an open door and to exploit that door to attack higher education. They've been extremely transparent about this. But our leadership up through July 31 was basically saying we are going to avoid this by repressing speech on campus. We're going to avoid this by basically, I think someone said they were in a meeting with Michael Drake when he was president saying, like, we're just gonna not be the tallest nail, but we're the UC. We are the tallest nail. Like, we're the institution. And they haven't really switched out of that. Part of that is that they've been pulling in leaders that have not actually been people that have worked in public higher education or who are bound to public higher ed. Milliken, of course, worked in the University of Texas, but he did not come up through the academic system. And so there's a loss of academic mission and instead of focus on the bottom line right now. And I think what we need to do is raise our voices and say, this isn't about saving the name and the brand of the UC. It's about saving what the UC is. Folks have asked, like, can we talk to our representatives? For us, Claudia, I love when you say that because I have also said that again and again, like, we are the bear, we are the bear. But we have been trying to connect this to Governor Newsom in particular. He is the person that has control over the regents. And so I think tying it to him and telling Gavin Newsom, who wants to run for president, like, we actually see this as a you problem, that you haven't dealt with this, is something we've had. So just popping into his higher ed comments and saying, like, what are you going to do about this? Seems to be really critical right now. Within the legislature, there's a sense that they don't want to be infighting, like they don't want to be criticizing the UC during a hard time. I don't share that concern personally. And I don't think either Claudia or I is out here trying to justify the actions of the UC. We're trying to push them to be more courageous.
Well, thank you so much, Claudia and Anna, for your answers and also for all the amazing work that you're doing on behalf of all of us. So important. In the last 2 minutes that we have left, I'm going to put out a two-part question here for both Gwen and for Carlos Davidson, who's another member of UC Unbowed, to talk about, is there work being done to bring together all of the groups that are organizing to change the way UC leadership is behaving? And then what specific action is UC Unbowed working on next? So Gwen and Carlos, if you can tag team that one.
Yeah, I'm going to
wrap it
answer
up
the
for us.
first part of that question super quickly so that Carlos can get into our next action. And I also want to notice that we're at the top of the hour, which is meant to be our ending time. And I think we're going to go over by just probably 3 or 4 minutes. So if you need to leave, of course we understand, but hope you can stay on for a couple of extra minutes. The answer about coordinating with student groups, faculty groups. Yes, that's really sort of our dream. As you heard from Donna, UC Unbowed is a very new organization. We formed ourselves in November with the idea that that students and faculty and unions all had sort of centers to organize around, but community members and alumni less so. So we wanted to make a space for organizing for those people who are in caring relationship with the University of California, but not as a silo that would never reach out to for example the faculty association that we heard about, or we want to be in collaborative relationship with students, faculty, and unions, and have been in our 2 months of existence building those relationships, and will certainly continue to do that. And with that, I will pass it over to Carlos.
Thank you. Thank you all for being with us this evening. We're almost done, but this is the part of the program where you can learn about something you can do to help in this fight. And that's what many of you have been asking in the chat. What can we do? What can we do? We have a brand new organizational sign-on letter to the governor, because we think the governor is key, also to the UC regents, UC president, and other legislators. And we're hoping to deliver this sign-on letter to the regents at their mid-March meeting. So give you a sense of the time frame. We already have an individual voices from the individual petition that Donna mentioned. The organizational sign-on letter is now an opportunity for organizations, community professional organizations, to add their voices. This was a strategic decision to show the breadth and strength of interest that's out there in the well-being of the university. The organizational sign-on letter talks about why we care about the university, and it has a number of demands. For example, we want a university that supports LGBTQ rights and provides transgender care at its medical centers. We want a university that does world-class climate research, etc. We're tight on time. I'll skip some of those details, but the letter has a bunch of demands. My request to you all tonight is to ask one organization that you are either a member of or know of if they would be willing to sign on to the letter. And the link is now, Donna just put in the chat. And that could be any sort of organization. It could be a faith-based group with a social justice committee. It could be a professional group, doctors or nurses for quality health care, or an LGBTQ or immigrant rights group. Any sort of group is welcome to sign. We already have sign-ons and wish to thank the following indivisible groups: East Bay, Marin, San Jose, Kensington, Richmond, Mid-Peninsula, Palo Alto Plus, It's Blue Turn, and Commit to Democracy. Like I said, the link is now in the chat. We will also send it to you in a follow-up email, and it will be up on the UC Unbowed webpage. If everyone here tonight asked one group, even if only half of them said yes, we would have a really powerful letter. Just a reminder again, this is an organizational sign-on letter. It's for groups to sign on. So the person who signs it needs to be authorized by the group to sign for the group. So please go do that. It will help build this powerful letter that we're going to send out. And with that, I'll pass it back to Donna or Gwen, I think.
Yes, thank you so much, Carlos, for your leadership on building out this sign-on letter. Just to be absolutely clear, we actually have two letters. We have the petition, which is for individuals to sign, and that is an opportunity that everyone, if you have not already signed our petition, I hope that you will. And then the second opportunity is the organizational sign-on letter that Carlos was just talking about. So two different opportunities, one for individuals and one for organizations, both of which to show the breadth of love and care for our public university. I want to thank you again to our amazing speakers, to all of you for your questions and enthusiasm, and to our co-sponsoring organizations for tonight's event, whose names are here on this slide. The University of California is fortunate to have such an amazing community of supporters. Thank you all so much for being with us tonight.